Hey guys, how y'all doing? Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me today, or tonight actually. This is episode 137 of Hockey on the Spot. I'm sorry I'm a little late getting this video out. I've had a really busy day. That'll most likely be the case every Tuesday for this month. Tuesdays are legit my busy days. Anywho, regardless, I'm still going to get these out to you. I'm going to get every team done this month. And for today, again, I will continue with the 30 teams in 30 days, as I just said. And for tonight's team, we're going to talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets. And the Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm really excited about talking about this team because last year was a major step for the franchise. But before we get into that, just a quick recap of what the expectations were going into the lockout Jordan year. Going into the lockout Jordan year was really pretty much marked the end of an era in Columbus, as it would mark the end of the Rick Nash era in Columbus. Rick Nash was the franchise player in Columbus for many years. Unfortunately, though, as the franchise player, he and the Jackets only made the playoffs once. That was back in 2009. They got swept out of the playoffs easily in the first round by the Detroit Red Wings. They had not made the playoffs since. In 2012, 2013, they came this close to making it. They fell just short of making it, but in the end, a really bad start for Sergei Bobrovsky and a really bad start to the season for the Blue Jackets in general, where nobody was getting any kind of scoring done, and Bobrovsky was playing very inconsistently, was really what killed the Blue Jackets' lockout Jordan year. But Bobrovsky's pretty much second half of the year, or second 3 quarters of the year, was the first quarter of the year that really screwed him, but his next 3 quarters of the year was what would win him the Vezina Trophy. It's been a long time since a goaltender won the Vezina Trophy without making the playoffs. The Blue Jackets would have made it. It came down to the final day of the season. They would have had to win their final game of the year against the Nashville Predators, which they did with flying colors. But at the same time, both the Minnesota Wild and the Detroit Red Wings, one of those two teams would have had to lose their final games of the year, and neither one of those two teams lost. I believe the Red Wings defeated the Dallas Stars on the final day, and Minnesota, if I'm correct, defeated the Colorado Avalanche. I could be wrong about that. This was Columbus's final year in the Western Conference, and so far their final year missing the playoffs. 2013-2014 comes around, and they, along with the Detroit Red Wings, make the big move to the Eastern Conference. The Detroit Red Wings go to the Atlantic Division, and the Columbus Blue Jackets join the Metropolitan Division. And they had a really good team last year, and Ryan Johansson would have a career year. He was pretty much one of the big reasons why the team got into the playoffs. They knew changes needed to be made. Bobrovsky, though, as far as his regular season went, did not have as good of a year. He kind of got off to a sluggish start once again, and he wasn't in the running to defend his President's Trophy's title. But guys like Ryan Johansson, Brandon Dubinsky, Cam Atkinson, Artem Anisimov, Nick Foligno, they all stepped up from the previous year. They didn't really have James Wisniewski as well. They really didn't have they didn't really bring in too many players last season, of course, except for Nathan Horton, and Nathan Horton spent most of last year injured. He, for the most part, really wasn't even much of a factor for the Blue Jackets' run last year. He only played 36 games, and he had 5 goals, 14 assists, and 19 points, but he was a -3, and he had only 48 shots and 24 penalty minutes. He did not play a single playoff game. So Nathan Horton will be one of the big key questions going into the season. And the Blue Jackets, they know they're going to need him if they want to go farther in the playoffs. This year, but last year for the Blue Jackets, they absolutely tore it up toward the end of the year, and they would make the playoffs for the second time in franchise history, finishing in the 7th seed in the East with 93 points, which tied with the Detroit Red Wings, but they would finish ahead of the Red Wings because of a better ROW. And as far as their season went overall, their record, 43, 32, and 7, again for 93 points, which was 4th in the Metropolitan Division, 7th in the Eastern Conference, a major stride for the franchise. In the Stanley Cup playoffs, they would play the Pittsburgh Penguins in the opening round, and even though they did not win that series, they lost in 6 games to Sidney Crosby and the Pens. That series marked made major strides for the team, as in Game 2 of that series in Pittsburgh, Cam Atkinson would score a historic overtime winner, which allowed the Blue Jackets to win the first playoff game in the history of their franchise. Their first ever playoff game win. And they repeated that magic in Game 4. That would be their first ever home playoff win at home when they came back from a 3-0 deficit to win 4-3 in overtime. The Blue Jackets really gave the Penguins a scare, as the final score in each of the first 4 games, as well as Game 6, were all 4-3 finals. Game 5 was a 3-1 final in favor of the Pens. And in those first 4 games, teams held 3-1 leads and blew it every single time. So even though the Blue Jackets ultimately would concede to the Penguins in 6 games, they had nothing to be ashamed about. I don't think they expected to advance very far, considering it was the Penguins, and the Blue Jackets did not defeat the Pittsburgh Penguins in a single regular season game last year. For them to not win a single regular season game against the Penguins last year and then go toe-to-toe with them in the playoffs, that speaks a lot of volumes, and that tells you that Jarmo Kekalainen is sending aka the first ever European general manager in National Hockey League history, is sending this franchise down the right path. That they're going in the right direction, and for Columbus fans, there's a lot to look forward to this season, going into this season, and a lot of their key pieces are back for the upcoming year, and they made some major moves as well, but they also had to get rid of quite a few pieces. As they want to go in a younger direction, they feel they can get younger, and they feel by getting younger they can eventually get better. Blake Como is no longer with the team. For example, he went on to sign with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Derek McKenzie was also allowed to walk. He signed with the Florida Panthers. Jack Skilly, who was a valuable part of their team at points, would go to the New York Islanders. Nikita Nikitin would have his rights dealt to the Edmonton Oilers, and then he would sign with the Edmonton Oilers. And then defenseman Nick Schultz, who was their sole trade deadline acquisition last year, would sign with the Philadelphia Flyers. Nick Schultz, of course, yes, just proved to be nothing more than a rental, and he didn't even do too much with the Blue Jackets anyway. He only played 2 playoff games, both in Columbus. So hopefully he'll do some good things out in Philadelphia. As far as what they brought in to replace those pieces this year, they're mostly going to search from within. They have a lot of youngsters that are ready to step up. Guys like Dana Tyrell, who's been in their system now for a little bit. He's a little bit older. He's 25 years of age, but he has NHL experience. He's played for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was on the Lightning last year. I think he got dealt to them, or he was a waiver claim or something like that. They have a couple of youngsters. Corey Tropp could take more of a full-time role on the team this year, as he actually played really well for them during the regular season at points. He may not be the scorer that everyone expected him to be, but he can maybe now develop his career in the NHL as more of a shutdown, fourth-line type player. He could be a key part of the roster next season. But as far as additions go for the Blue Jackets this year, they only made 3 additions, one of which really isn't even on the list for their offseason outlook. They brought in, and that is the addition of Jerry D'Amigo coming over from the Toronto Maple Leafs. He could prove to be a pretty good young player for the Blue Jackets and eventually be a good depth player for them. He was signed over from the Maple Leafs. I believe that was the case. It could have also been a trade. It could have also been a trade. It could have also been a trade, as I just said. But they made a couple of other additions as well. They added forward Brian Gibbons coming over from the Pittsburgh Penguins. They signed him to a 1-year, 2-way contract. Okay. Yeah, they acquired Jerry D'Amigo in a trade, actually, along with a 7th-round pick, a conditional 2015 7th-round pick, and Matt Fratton was the player dealt. He was dealt to the Toronto Maple Leafs in that deal. That was not on the official offseason outlook list. So I really paid no attention to that. But I think it's a good trade for both sides. Matt Fratton has some high expectations, and actually he's kind of a Toronto Maple Leafs returnee. He was originally dealt to the LA Kings in the Jonathan Bernier deal. And Jerry D'Amigo, he's a Binghamton, New York native, former 6th-round pick from 2009 at 158th overall. He's still young. He's 23 years of age. And he played 22 games last year, had a goal and 2 assists, -1 rating, though, and only 12 shots on goal. But this is a kid who could provide some depth, and he could battle for a full-time roster spot for the coming year with the Blue Jackets. So we'll see. Though he's expected to be a pretty solid defensive player in the near future. So we'll see how that goes. So he was one of the additions. Matt Fratton was another player going. Again, he returns to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But like I said, the other players coming in, Brian Gibbons, as I said, he's actually probably a bigger addition than one would think. He was signed to a 1-year, 2-way contract, which means he could go and play in the minors. He could very much go and play in the minors. But when he was called up by the Pittsburgh Penguins, this 26-year-old undrafted 5'8", 170-pounder from Braintree, Massachusetts, played a huge role for the Pittsburgh Penguins last year. He actually played quite a few playoff games, and he was very good in those playoff games. For years, he was always considered to be one of the more consistent defensive forwards down in Wilkes-Barre with the Scranton Penguins. Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins. So, he has a lot of expectations on his play. In the playoffs and regular season combined, a +7, +5 in the regular season, and 29 shots on goal and only 6 penalty minutes. So, and he even had a power play goal. So this is a kid who I think is going to make the roster. He's, again, signed to a 2-way contract in case it doesn't work out. But I think he'll make the roster, and he'll add to their depth very, very nicely. Even though he's younger than Blake Comeau, I say, as far as the future is concerned, he's going to be an upgrade from Blake Comeau. But the big addition for the Columbus Blue Jackets came via trade when they acquired veteran forward Scott Hartnell from the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for R.J. Umberger and a 4th-round pick for the upcoming draft. R.J. Umberger, as I said, he returns to the Philadelphia Flyers for the 2nd time in his career. This is a player who the Blue Jackets were going to buy out via compliance buyout if they were not able to trade him. But they were actually going to buy him out originally. But then they saw this trade, and they saw that it could work, and it did go through. So Scott Hartnell now a member of the Columbus Blue Jackets. And this is a player who has developed a very nasty reputation throughout the years. For Scott Hartnell, after he struggled very much so during the lockout Jordan year, he had a major comeback year last year. He played 78 games and had 20 goals, 32 assists, 52 points. And he was a plus 11 with 207 shots on goal. And he had 103 penalty minutes. And now obviously penalty minutes never really a good thing, but that's the kind of player that Scott Hartnell is. He is an all-around power forward who plays a grinding style, bit of a dirty game at times, and he's 32 years of age, so he still has a year or two left in his prime, which could help the Blue Jackets for the near future. But overall, they needed an upgrade. They needed to get a little more physical. They knew that if they wanted to go farther in the playoffs, and Scott Hartnell is just the guy they needed. He's not going to get as much hate now as he did with the Philadelphia Flyers, but he's still going to be a pretty hated player in the league. But the one concern, though, about Hartnell, he really didn't do too well in the playoffs last year. Through that 7-game series with the New York Rangers, he played all 7 games, but he only had 3 assists in that series, not one single goal. He was an even rating in the plus-minus, and he had 6 penalty minutes and 19 shots on goal. He did not look like the natural Scott Hartnell in that series. He did not look like Scott Hartnell. He did not look like himself. That's going to be a big concern, obviously. And the other downgrade is the speed factor. R.J. Umberger brought speed to the team, and Scott Hartnell not as fast as R.J. Umberger was. So they lose a little bit of speed, but they get a better overall player. They also lose a little bit of leadership as well. I feel like Umberger are better suited for a leadership role than Hartnell, but that's not an issue because they have the leadership in Columbus already. I don't believe they have a captain yet, though. That's going to be a big question going into the season if they do not have a captain. And one of the big issues, though, that's going on in Columbus right now is the situation with Ryan Johansson. Yeah, they do not have a captain. Jared Boll, Brandon Dubinsky, Mark Letestu, and Jack Johnson are the acting alternate captains. So hopefully they'll choose a captain for the upcoming season. But as we now take a look at some of the big questions in Columbus this year, as I said, will they get Ryan Johansson signed before the start of training camp? He's a restricted free agent right now, and there's very little chance that he would go anywhere else because he's not going into arbitration. The arbitration period is over, and he's too young to go into arbitration. The Blue Jackets are looking to sign him to a 2-year bridge deal. He wants a 4-year deal. He wants a deal that'll take him to unrestricted free agency. They're hoping they can get that done, and I really hope they can get something done too. Ryan Johansson, the former 4th overall pick from the 2010 NHL entry draft, is a star on the rise. He's in the making, and he is going to be one of the big superstars in the league for years to come. As he had a breakout year last year, and you gotta expect that he's going to better those stats for the upcoming season. Of course, he'll obviously have to prove himself, but there's no doubt in my mind he will. He's a game changer. He uses his body well. He has slick hands, great speed, kind of a power forward / sniper kind of player. So he's going to do great things for this franchise, and he is the next big star in Columbus with Rick Nash gone. So a lot to look forward to. Obviously, though, they got to get Ryan Johansson signed, and I hope they do because he is their top-line center for years to come. But the big question is, can they get a deal done before training camp? That's going to be one of the big things going into this offseason. And then, of course, you also got to wonder how this team is going to take the next big step. Well, The only thing that really needs to happen is that they got to be faster and they got to be a little bit more physical. Will Nathan Horton rebound from shoulder and abdominal surgeries? One of the reasons they maybe didn't go farther than the first round, or maybe didn't send the series to 7 games instead of 6 games, was that they missed Nathan Horton for the whole playoffs and most of the regular season. And even when he was healthy, to me, he really didn't show much stride. He really wasn't much of a factor. And he's on that big contract. He's one of the more overpaid players in the league. When both he and David Clarkson were given those big contracts during the lockout-shortened off-season. Or excuse me, during the 2013 off-season. Nathan Horton's got to recover from those injuries. He's got to stay healthy. And, he's got to be a factor. He's got to prove that he can still play the game and be a legitimate top 6 forward. If he can do that, the Blue Jackets are going to be a good team. And hopefully, if he and Scott Hartnell are put on the same line, maybe they can find some chemistry together. Maybe with a guy like Brandon Dubinsky on the second line. We'll see, though. It's going to be very interesting. Or maybe both of them on the top line with Ryan Johansson. We'll see. What will the fourth line look like with Derek McKenzie, Blake Como, and Jack Skilly gone, as well as Matt Fratton? Well, again, they re-signed Corey Tropp and added both Jeremy D'Amigo and Brian Gibbons. And they still have Jared Bull and Mark Letestu. So those are all guys who could battle for fourth line duty. And they also have this prospect in their system by the name of Simon Hjalmarsson, who's expected to be a gritty type player coming out of Värnamo, Sweden. He's 25 years of age, a former second-round pick by the St. Louis Blues in 2007. He's now a Blue Jacket. He put up quite some numbers down for Linköping in Sweden, but he's more known for his defensive awareness and his ability to maybe play more of a grinding type style. So maybe a guy like Simon Hjalmarsson could help this team on the fourth line. We will see, though. We will see. Can the Blue Jackets avoid another slow start? It seems that's been their problem every single season since day one. They get off to these really slow starts. Even in the 2 seasons they made the playoffs, they get off to these really slow starts. And it was the slow start that screwed them over in the lockout-shortened year. That was why they missed the playoffs that year. They got to get off to a good start, and then they got to stay consistent. That's going to be key in Columbus. And then the biggest, maybe one of the bigger questions of all, who will represent the Blue Jackets in their own rink for the 2015 NHL All-Star Game? That's right, Columbus fans. The very good news for you all. You guys are hosting the All-Star Game this year. The Columbus Blue Jackets will host the All-Star Game at Nationwide Arena this year. They were supposed to host it 2 years ago, but it could not happen because of the lockout-shortened year. And maybe one of the bigger unrelated questions, will this motivate a guy like Rick Nash for the New York Rangers to play better so he can play in the All-Star Game in the same arena he began his NHL career? That's kind of an unrelated question, but just one to think about, and I'll probably ask that same question when I talk about the New York Rangers in 2 days. But going back to the Columbus Blue Jackets, coming back to the here and the now, it's going to be interesting what players on the Blue Jackets do represent them in the All-Star Game this year. And they do have the talent that can go to the All-Star Game, as we now go ahead and take a look at this team's lineup. As we take a look at their lineup, the Blue Jackets have a very interesting lineup this year. And again, like I said, Jarmo Kekalainen has really developed his players well, and they has a lot to look forward to with youngsters coming up. But what the lines could look like, Ryan Johansson was without a doubt their top line center. Again, they just need to get him signed, and hopefully they can do it before training camp. And if they do, then he'll definitely be their top line center. But the players who could play alongside him, Nathan Horton and Scott Hartnell, two veteran players who, can really show a guy like Johansson how to take it up to a whole nother notch. Horton could provide the two-way game on that line, of course, if he manages to stay healthy, and then Hartnell can provide the grit, and then you got Johansson as the scorer, and Hartnell is a guy who can pass, he can pass as well. He's kind of a playmaker. He's a real underrated playmaker as well. So that would look like a good line. Again, assuming Horton can stay healthy. As far as the second line goes, Brandon Dubinsky, he's a guy who can play wing, but most likely will take the center position for this upcoming year. One possibility is that he could play left wing on the top line with Ryan Johansson, but I don't think that's going to be the case. He'll be a center, and he'll be the second line center, since they really aren't that deep at center when you really look at it. They're not that deep at center if Dubinsky's not playing there. That's when you really look at it. Because I'm pretty sure last year he did play wing, and Artem Anisimov was the second line center, and he's really more of a third line center type guy. So, if without slotting Dubinsky at that second line center position, this is not a very deep team at center. So you got to put Dubinsky back at center, and you got to have him as your second line center, and he'll do just fine there. Especially if he gets to play alongside two good young kids coming up like Cam Atkinson and Matt Calvert. These are two players who have really become staples on the Blue Jackets lineup. No one ever thought these would be two players that would come to do so, but they both play a very good speed game. They're both very good at it. And by the way, it was actually Matt Calvert who scored the historic overtime winning goal to get their first playoff win, not Cam Atkinson. I said Cam Atkinson earlier. It was actually Matt Calvert. That was my mistake. But both late-round draft picks from 2008. They're both 24 years of age. And both of those two playing alongside a player now in his prime, in Brandon Dubinsky. That's going to be some big strides for both those players, playing alongside Columbus's second leading scoring forward from last year and third leading scorer overall. Third line, you have a really good third line in Artem Anisimov, who played the second line last year and had a very good year, his first ever 20-goal season, but he's more suited for the third line, and that's where he'll be for the upcoming year. Bowen Jenner on the right side, another good kid on the rise, who will eventually be a top-line winger or even a center. He's a guy who can play either the wing or the center, but they like him at the right wing side, playing the off wing. So he could probably stay there for a while, and he eventually could make his way up to the top line. I can see that being the case in the near future, but for now, he'll probably have to stick with the third line with Artem Anisimov and Nick Foligno, who is without a doubt the ideal third line player in the league, at least for Columbus, and he's still very young. He's 26 years of age, and he's become a premier depth player in the league. He may not be living up to his first-round draft status, a former 28th overall pick by the Ottawa Senators in 2006, and when you're drafted that high, you're expected to do more as far as offense goes. But he's become a very good depth player and a premier depth player in the league, which has made him a valuable asset to the Blue Jackets. And he scored the overtime winning goal in game number 4 for the historic first ever playoff win on home ice to tie the series at 2. A big moment in the career of Nick Foligno. And then, of course, the fourth line. This is where it really gets interesting, because you got probably 7 players who will all battle to be staples on the fourth line. As far as I'm concerned, Mark Letestu and Corey Tropp are probably the only two staples for that fourth line. The other 5 players will probably have to battle for spots, but you got Mark Letestu at center and Corey Tropp on the right wing. He didn't play in the playoffs He only played 2 games in the playoffs last year, but he played a total of 53 regular season games, 9 with the Buffalo Sabres and 44 with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he scored one of the big highlight goals of the year this past year, one of his 2 goals from last year. He's 25 years of age. He's going to have much more of a role on the team this year. There's no doubt about it. He'll develop into a very good shutdown forward, a very good defensive forward, and he'll give that fourth line some energy. And then that left wing spot, they have the kid I just talked about, Simon Chalmerson, who is a possibility to play on that line. But they also got Jared Boll and Dana Tyrell, who could also battle for spots. And then you can't count out the 2 youngsters, Brian Gibbons and Jerry D'Amigo, who are both also going to battle for fourth line spots. That's going to be key, because whichever one of those forwards doesn't make it, we could see a couple of trades in Columbus this year to kind of thin out the depth just a little bit, maybe get a couple draft picks, maybe a second-round pick or so, and let those kids go to places where they will be mainstays in the lineup. But look out for Simon Chalmerson. He could be NHL ready this year. And Brian Gibbons, again, he was so good in Pittsburgh last year. He's going to be sorely missed in Pittsburgh, and Columbus is going to love him. It's just a matter of him being able to play. So you look at that forward crop. That's a pretty good group of forwards right there. Maybe not the best group, but a solid enough group, and a group that I believe can get this team back in the playoffs. Then you look at the defense for this group. A young defense core for sure, but one that I think can be very effective if everyone's playing at their best. You got the veterans in James Wisniewski, Jack Johnson, and Fedor Tyutin. James Wisniewski had tied for a career high in points last year. It was his best year by far as a Columbus Blue Jacket, finally living up to that contract. And he was second on the team in point scoring behind Ryan Johansson. He was one of the top scoring defensemen in the league as well. He'll be expected to have another similar year. He'll be expected to have a similar season to what he showed. He's 30 years of age. 7 goals, 44 assists, 51 points, an even rating, 61 penalty minutes, and 166 shots on goal. That's actually a career high, I think. Actually, that might not be. I don't know. And in the playoffs, he wasn't very good in the playoffs. Only 2 assists in 6 games and a -7, 10 penalty minutes, and 12 shots on goal. He wasn't very good in the playoffs, so that's kind of a concern. But during the regular season, he was without a doubt their best offensive defenseman, and maybe one of their better defensive defensemen as well. So you got him, Jack Johnson, and Fedor Tyutin, who are all veterans on the team. But then you got the young defensemen like Ryan Murray, Tim Erickson, David Savard, Dalton Prout. All kids who show a lot of promise. Ryan Murray, of course, the former second overall pick from 2012, behind Nail Yakupov, had a pretty good rookie season. Would have played during the lockout Jordan year had he not suffered a season-ending injury in, I believe, training camp or development camp, or wherever he suffered the injury. He suffered an injury that ended his season, that kept him out for the entire year, and there was concern that was going to slow his development, but it didn't seem to show those signs last year in his rookie year with the Blue Jackets. So with that being said, the defense pairs could look like this. The defense pairs could look like Ryan Murray and James Wisniewski on the top defense pair, Jack Johnson and Fedor Tyutin on the second pair, and Tim Erickson and David Savard on the third pair, with Dalton Prout being the seventh guy. However, there's also talk that David Savard could be ready to take a much bigger role in Columbus for the upcoming year and have a breakout year. If that's the case, then he could move up to the number 2 where Fedor Tyutin is placed, and Fedor Tyutin can move down to play the third pair with Tim Erickson. But Tim Erickson is another guy who is NHL ready this season. He is going to play full-time this year. There's no doubt about it. He is ready. He is ready because Nikita Nikitin is gone, and that left an opening for either him or even Dalton Prout to make an impression in training camp. But when you really look at it, from last season, put Nikita Nikitin back in for a second, Columbus, I believe, had one of the top scoring blue lines in the National Hockey League as far as points were concerned. They had a lot of support from the blue line last year, which you really want to have on your team, which shows you that most of these defensemen, if not all of them, can join the rush and be offensive threats when needed to be, but also get back and play that defensive game, which means they have a lot of two-way defensemen and with defensive upsides. And then, of course, in goal, you got Sergei Bobrovsky as the unquestioned starter, and Curtis McElhinney, who they did re-sign this offseason because they like him. He had a very big year last year as the backup goaltender. Disregarding the 10-11-1 record, the one game under 500 record, he played really well. 270 goals against average and a .909 save percentage, which are pretty good statistics for a backup goaltender, and he had 2 shutouts as well. So they like Curtis McElhinney. I actually like him as well. I think he's one of the more underrated backup goaltenders in the league. But one would think, but when you really think about it, he might not be the confirmed backup for next year. You think he would be, but you have a guy like a goaltender like Anton Forsberg, who could be ready for a promotion as soon as this year. He's 21 years of age, and he could be the backup for next season behind Sergei Bobrovsky if McElhinney does, in fact, not work out. I think McElhinney will be the backup at least to start the year, and if he doesn't play well and doesn't have the same kind of year he had last year, then McElhinney will probably get traded for a low draft pick, and Forsberg will be called up to be the backup goaltender. But you also have some other players who could be ready to compete for spots as well. Forwards like Marco Dano, Alexander Wenberg, those two up front, and even though this guy isn't on the list, Kirby Reichel is another forward who could also battle. And then on defense, Cody Golubov and Will Weber. Cody Golubov has played a few NHL games, and he already has a goal on his resume. He's another kid with some pretty decent expectations to be a third-pair defenseman, more of a shutdown type player, with a right-handed shot. But we'll see. I don't think Will Weber will make it. Don't know too much about him, but he is 25 years of age, so he's not getting that much younger, but he's a big body, and he's another shutdown type defenseman. So those are two guys who will battle for roster spots as well. And then, as I said before, Anton Forsberg in goal. They have another goaltender in Oscar Dansk, but I don't believe he's ready just yet to come up to play in the NHL level, but he will be one day, and he will be a very good goaltender in the future. As we now take a look at the Blue Jackets' top 10 prospects, and let me tell you something, I like this top 10 group a lot. This is probably the most worldly top 10 prospect group that I personally have seen, and it was really hard to determine who was going to be the top 10 prospect, the top prospect. But center Alexander Wenberg from Sweden was the guy chosen as the top prospect, and I don't have any complaints, but you do have guys that you also got to consider. but Wenberg could be ready for a spot on the team as soon as this year. You got Mike Riley on there, who needs probably another year to develop in college, but he's going to be a good two-way defenseman in the future. Sonny Milano, who was the 16th overall pick this past year, he's got unbelievable hands, probably the most unbelievable hands of any Columbus prospect, but the reason he's not my highlighted prospect is because of his inability to play defensively. He needs to work on his defensive game. Kirby Reichel, as I said, is another kid, the son of former NHL enforcer Warren Reichel. This kid will be much better than his father, and I'm pretty sure he was my highlighted prospect last year. He could actually be ready to play as soon as this year. Marco Dano, it's hard to say with him. The top 10 prospect list says he needs another year, but the lineup list said he could be ready to challenge for a spot this year. So for Marco Dano, it's kind of up in the air. Ryan Collins, another one. Dylan Hetherington is another kid. Josh Anderson, who was on Canada's World Junior Championship group. And then, of course, Oscar Dansk. If he's the 10th prospect on this list, then that tells you how deep the Blue Jackets prospect pool is. Definitely the deepest in the Metropolitan Division so far. Deeper than the New York Islanders, deeper than the Carolina Hurricanes, deeper than the New Jersey Devils, and deeper than the Washington Capitals. But the one prospect I did not really bring up was their number 3 prospect, and the reason being is because he is the prospect that I'm going to be highlighting. The prospect who I think will be the most interesting to watch, and the one who I think could prove to be the best is, in fact, their number 3 prospect, right winger Oliver Bjorkstrand. And Oliver Bjorkstrand is a very interesting player. He was the 89th overall pick from the 2013 draft. That's the 3rd round. But last season, he played like a player who should have been drafted higher. He played 69 games for the Portland Winterhawks of the Western Hockey League, and we all know the kind of things that the Portland Winterhawks franchise are able to do with their young players as far as development. They turn those players into stars, and that's exactly what Bjorkstrand was last year. 50 goals, 59 assists, 109 points, and this is a player coming out of Denmark, Herning, Denmark to be more precise. He turned 19 years old in April, and he was also a plus 44, which is unreal. And then in the playoffs, 21 Western Hockey League playoff games en route to the WHL final, 16 goals, 33 points, and a plus 17 rating. That's unreal. And in his 134 career regular season games in the WHL, 81 goals, 172 points, and a plus 82, while through 42 career playoff games, 24 goals, 52 points, and a plus 28 rating. Which means this is not only a dynamic offensive player, but he'll also be a dynamic defensive player, the native of Herning, Denmark. The one and only concern with Oliver Bjorkstrand, which could also be the reason why he may need another year of development, is his size. He's only 5'11", and he's only at 166 pounds. So he needs to get bigger, and he needs to gain a little bit of weight to match up to that height. If he can do that, then he is going to be a legit roster player on the Columbus Blue Jackets. He'll be a top 6 player and potentially even the top line right winger playing next to Ryan Johansson for years to come. I think this kid is going to be stellar, and I think we're looking at one of the next big players to come out of Denmark. You got to look at a guy like Nikolai Ehlers, who was drafted this year, 9th overall by the Winnipeg Jets. He's another player who could be argued in that category. But Denmark hockey is growing, folks. Hockey in Denmark is growing, and it's only a matter of time before they become a staple country in the international hockey world. And someone like Oliver Bjorkstrand could help along with that. So look out for Denmark and their players coming up. Now, the player on the Columbus Blue Jackets who I think needs to be better this year in order for the Blue Jackets to make their second straight playoff appearance and to maybe even go farther in the playoffs, The player who I definitely think needs to step up this year, without a doubt, no question about it, has to be Nathan Horton. Nathan Horton, we've talked about him all video long, but we're going to talk about him again real fast. Again, former third overall pick from 2003 by the Florida Panthers. That's now an irrelevant statistic. He's 29 years of age now, and which means he should still be in his prime. But he has been injury prone the last few years. Last year in the lockout Jordan year, with the Boston Bruins, he had 13 goals but only 9 assists. One could tell you that maybe that wasn't really a Nathan Horton type year. With the Blue Jackets this year, he only played 36 games and only 5 goals, 14 assists, 19 points, a -3, 24 penalty minutes, and only 48 shots on goal, and not one single playoff game played. So this is a player who not only needs to stay healthy this year, but he needs to play like the Nathan Horton we know he has the potential to be. We know Nathan Horton and his abilities to be a grindy two-way forward with a good knack for the net and solid hands and a solid scoring abilities. That's the kind of player that Nathan Horton needs to be in Columbus if they want to make that extra jump and get farther in the playoffs. So, if they want to get back to the playoffs for the second straight year, again, you're always going to follow the goaltender, Sergei Bobrovsky. We know Sergei Bobrovsky has the potential to have another Vezina Trophy type year. We haven't really talked too much about him. But, to me, you really just got to look back at the guy who's won the Stanley Cups and who was a big part of those two Boston Bruins teams that made the finals, that won the Stanley Cup. And so you look back at Nathan Horton, who in both postseasons with the Bruins was absolutely tremendous. So this is a guy who we know, even though he hasn't been in the playoffs much, he's proven that in the playoffs he takes his game up to a whole nother notch. So if he can stay healthy, he's going to help the Blue Jackets in a big way, but he also has to be consistent as well. So in order for the Blue Jackets to be better, Nathan Horton has to be better. So overall, do I think the Columbus Blue Jackets are going to go back to the playoffs this year? Do I think they're a playoff team? I do. I absolutely do. There's no doubt in my mind that this team has proven that there's no limit to what they can do. They're literally one step away from winning their first ever playoff series and going to the second round. But they need to prove it. It's all about consistency, and all these players in this lineup this year, particularly the forwards, the young talent that could battle for spots this year, one's got to feel that someone like Alexander Wennberg, at the very least, is going to be in the lineup this year without question, at least for the first 9 games of the year, which means someone's going to be out of the lineup. So there's a lot to look forward to in Columbus this year. I think the younger players are going to come in much more mature, and the veterans on the team need to step up. This is a good, perfect mix of youngsters and veterans, and they need to play like such. They need to play like a team. This is a team game, and that's going to be the biggest thing for the Blue Jackets this year. If they can play a complete team game and also get off to a good start for once, then they're going to be a playoff team. I think they'll finally get off to that good start that they're looking for. I think Sergei Bobrovsky is going to have a big year, a kind of a comeback year in a way, because even though he was good last year, he wasn't like he was in the Vezina Trophy year. I think he'll be back at that Vezina Trophy status this year, at least in the running, and I think the Columbus Blue Jackets are a playoff team in my mind. And that will do it for episode 137 of Hockey on the Spot. Be sure to tune in tomorrow when we talk about the Philadelphia Flyers. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Thank you all, and have a great night. See ya.